am trying to remove the word should from my vocabulary. I think that the word should is quite a toxic word, and it always leads me to act within the expectations of others rather than the expectations I should give to myself.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Career Growth Podcast. I'm your host, Kailas. For those who are familiar with what we do, we provide international internships and we provide in person as well as remote opportunities. Now, the interesting thing is, remote working took off after COVID. No one's forgotten 2020, big year for all of us, right? And since then, with the pandemic, getting under control somewhat around the world, it kind of died down. People switched over to their in office models a lot, but that also gave way to a lot of discourse about whether or not remote working is a sustainable model. And what we're trying to do right now is kind of analyze that claim, whether it is a sustainable model or not. But in particular, we've spoken a lot about how beneficial remote working can be to companies, to the employer. What we neglect to cover, as frequently is the impacts it has on the workers, whether it's positive or negative, and how it could potentially lead to more accessibility and better opportunities for the most marginalized amongst us. And here to share her experience with us is Maeve O'Briant, digital content creator at Sophie Hayes Foundation, who is a great friend of mine now, and has had an has had several amazing insights into why it could possibly help improve accessibility. She's going to share her thoughts with us today. It's so great to have you here with us, Maeve.
Thank you so much. It's amazing to be here. I'm absolutely honored.
Honestly, yeah. I mean, how have you been? I already know how have you been. I don't know why I'm asking you this question. Instead, I'm going to ask you, how are you feeling now that you're finally on the podcast?
I'm feeling excited. Actually, now that it's actually started recording, I'm much less nervous than I thought I would be. And I think it's probably mostly down to you and also your introduction to me being your new best friend. I'm very, very flattered.
Yes, we are new besties.
I
This has
love
been
it.
decided. See, we're matching today, and we didn't plan that,
Exactly.
y'all.
Yeah, didn't even
We didn't
plan it.
plan
We're just
this.
on the same wavelength. Yeah.
Same wavelength. Loving this for us already. And so, Maeve, let's anchor you a little more in the minds of our audience. Let's take a look at your career journey thus far. How did you start out, and what led you to where you are today?
Absolutely. So, if we go back to when I was 2, when I was
Yes,
2
please
years
do tell
old,
us.
I wouldn't stop drawing. I was obsessed with drawing, and from like the moment that I was a conscious human being, I always knew that I wanted to be an artist, and that visual creation was what inspired me the most and fulfilled me the most. And that has stayed true and constant my entire life without a single question. I think the only thing that's impacted that is actually the way that that fits into society and capitalism.
Yeah.
I remember, going to, I'm from the States, if you can't tell. In high school, I studied art in, the AP programs, and applied to art schools for uni. And I got so much criticism, honestly, from both the professionals around me, the college counselors at high school, and even from close friends and family, because of the stigma of, art not being the most profitable industry. But I just couldn't imagine myself doing anything else. So I ended up going to the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, and I studied fine art and art education there for 2 years. And while I loved my classes, I was not such a big fan of the studio environment. It's quite catty. And I also felt like I wanted something with a
Yeah.
bit more structure. And I love writing as well. And I love research. So I ended up finishing my degree in art history over on this side of the pond in the UK at the University of Sussex. And I think studying art history was what sort of opened the gate in my mind to ways of creating visual material that
Yeah.
perhaps could be a bit more profitable, a bit more marketable, a bit more corporate, for lack of a better word, more
Yeah.
applicable to many different areas. And I started sort of taking my fine art practice. I'm an oil painter. I kind of made that more of a personal practice because I also found that trying to paint for a living
Yeah.
really stifled my creativity. Like I want
Mm.
that creativity to come naturally. And if I force it, it just doesn't work the same way. But if I
Yeah.
take my technical skills and knowledge and the art history side of things, the conceptual side of things, and apply them to marketing, um, it worked. Yeah, it works.
Yep.
So I have been doing a little bit of marketing here and there in terms of like content creation, copywriting. I was working for an agency where I was doing social media copywriting for a while, and then I landed my absolute dream job at Sophie Hayes Foundation, which is where I'm at now. So I'm the
Yes.
digital content creator there. Just working for a nonprofit is my absolute dream. Creating, visual material that is not trying to necessarily sell a product, but is actually being put out into the world to help make it better. Really makes it feel much more like art than marketing. And that I find just beyond fulfilling. And I think I want to stay in the charity sector
Yeah.
for the rest of my career. I can't see myself doing anything else. Yeah, I'm so, so happy there. Absolutely love
It's
it.
it definitely, like, I can feel your passion for your current role come, like, just kind of emanating off you,
Oh,
just like I mean, that's the kind of passion that you need to have when you are a creative, because it's really easy to get lost in the corporate sea if you can't find a niche for yourself. And I'm really glad you found yours. And the Sophie Hayes Foundation was actually established with a very, very important goal in mind. Would you mind running us through like why the Sophie Hayes Foundation was established and what that goal is?
absolutely. So the Sophie Hayes Foundation was founded about, I believe it's 13 years ago now, by Sophie Hayes, which is a pseudonym. But she was a survivor of modern slavery and human trafficking. She was trafficked to Italy, and was forced into sex trafficking there for 6 months before she was able to escape and come back to the UK and establish the foundation. She has a best-selling book called Trafficked, which is where you may have heard the name Sophie Hayes before. It's an incredible book. Big trigger warning on it. It's not
Yeah,
for the faint
definitely.
of
Yeah.
heart, but it is an incredible insight into that experience. So she set up the charity with the intent to contribute to the sustainable freedom of women survivors of modern slavery and human trafficking. So essentially, what we're doing is we're looking more after they have escaped the situation that they're in, after they have been recognized by the system in the UK that identifies victims of modern slavery and human trafficking.
Yeah.
What happens after, I believe it's 46 days of support that the National Referral Mechanism
Yeah.
then offers a, certified survivor. What then? Often they are in a new country. They might not speak English. They might have no idea how to sustain themselves. The job market is very different here than many other parts of the world, and many,
Absolutely. Yeah.
are in this situation that actually will result in a very high risk for re-exploitation. And so that's why in our mission statement we say sustainable freedom, because freedom in one point in time is only for one point in time. We want to make sure that that freedom is able to continue throughout the rest of their lives and give them the resources and tools that they need to help sustain their own freedom and become truly independent without risk of re-exploitation. So what we offer is an employability program that helps them not only gain and sharpen skills for employability, but also it heavily focuses on sort of personal development, healing, self-confidence. It's it's much more than the name suggests. It's also a year-long program, which is the longest program offered in the sector. And then after they graduate from that program, they enter into the CREW, which stands for Creative, Resilient, Empowered Women. And the CREW is a survivor network that they have the opportunity to be part of for life. So they can make friends, they can continue refining skills, they have lovely events for making happy new memories. And then we've also just recently launched Sophie, our new conversational English program. So we can try and make the program more accessible to those who may not have the proficient level of English required. So those are our three big offers at the moment. And we're hoping to, keep expanding and growing and changing as the needs of survivors change. Seems like a very turbulent time for survivors in the UK in particular at the moment. So we're trying to, react to their needs as they change. But I'm so happy to be a part of it. I'm so proud of what we do.
Yeah, and thank you so much for the good work that all of you, your entire team's doing. It's genuinely so important, and it's also. I'm really glad that you did bring up inclusivity and accessibility, because what Sophie Hayes is doing is already making things more inclusive and accessible, but we're only talking about a very small component of the discussion today, which is remote working. But just to like give our listeners a general idea, it's a very important topic, but how do you see it being approached in your circles, your professional circles?
Oh, so I definitely see remote working increasing quite significantly. I mean, not only do the stats speak for themselves, but just, when you go on LinkedIn, I feel like everyone seems to be at least hybrid working as a result of the pandemic. I do feel like I see a push to return to office, but in a hybrid capacity. And I think I see more and more people recognizing the benefits of remote working and embracing remote working. In the charity sector in particular, I feel like I see much more of an embrace of remote working in terms of looking at it from an accessibility and inclusion perspective, because that sector does tend to be slightly more aware of things that impact human rights and well-being, considering that's what a lot of them have been founded to protect. So I definitely am seeing quite a big push towards remote working, flexible working, and hybrid working for many different reasons. I think it also includes the growing of the network that is available to us. So with that widening of networks, we can better access diverse talent as well. You might be able, when you're searching for talent, to then hire people that might not be in your geographical boundary. So it really opens the box there. That really does, I think, open that boundary.
Yeah, it's true. It really does.
Yeah, the only thing that I might say that might be, if I can play devil's advocate, a negative side of remote working in terms of accessibility and inclusivity would be the issue of the digital divide. So I think if people are offering remote and hybrid working as an option, I think it would be good practice to also include any technology or equipment that you need to successfully do that from home. Because if we are going to look at this as a way to promote accessibility and inclusion, we need to look at it from, many different lenses, feminist lenses, disability and ability lenses. And we also need to look at it from a class lens and a finance lens. And people from lower classes might not have the technology that you need to actually access that work, which is a shame because statistically, at least in the US, the average annual income of remote workers is $4,000 more than other workers, which I find fascinating. So on one hand, if we're widening our networks and hiring a more diverse staff with the help of remote working, we're allowing marginalized people who might not be in the geographical location of, cities that tend to offer those sorts of roles, the opportunity to access higher paying jobs. But at the same time, if we're not providing the technology and equipment, those jobs are just going to go
Exactly.
to the people that are there anyway.
Yeah.
So it is something that I think needs to be looked at very holistically. But I think that the benefits vastly outweigh the negatives. And I think that there are solutions to those negatives, which is supplying equipment. And I think that
Yeah.
equipment will pay for itself, given the research that's been done into remote working. And as you said, we won't dwell too much on the benefits to the employer, but just to briefly touch on it,
No, of course, yeah. I
remote
mean,
working. I do think I have a nice statistic that I wrote down somewhere. Companies on average see $2,000 of profit increase per remote worker versus a non-remote worker. So
yeah.
there you go. You've already got that $2,000 that you can use towards investing in equipment, and then upskilling that person, and seeing that profit grow exponentially. Not to mention, productivity increases vastly with remote work. From the
Yeah.
Office of National Statistics, they said that productivity increased 48.3% and staff well-being
Oh,
increased 79.9%. And I think that,
amazing.
to be honest, well-being and productivity are so closely related. Like you were saying earlier, it's so important, not just for creatives, but for anyone to be fulfilled in their job. And I think when you're fulfilled in your role, you feel motivated to do it to the best of your ability, and in a timely manner.
Yeah.
And then also from the the Office of National Statistics, sickness levels were reduced 27.3% when remote working was in place. So, you're
I wonder
also,
why.
I know, big surprise.
Interesting.
So that's, a benefit to the employer and the employee, because the employee is able to invest in their well-being,
Yeah.
able to maintain their health and their stress levels, while the employer is able to retain those working hours, not have, paid sick leave, and have a more productive employee overall.
Yeah. Absolutely. That's the yeah, I'm really glad you came with your statistics because it's super
I love
super important.
statistics.
Yeah. I love statistics too. I don't like doing statistics. I like listening to them.
Exactly.
That's the difference. I like learning them.
Yeah,
But yeah, it's thank you so much for like highlighting those because I feel like it's really, really important to put things into perspective. You know,
100%.
and
Yeah.
the stats help. The stats help solidify that. But we also spoke about the pros and cons of working remotely in a more general, overall holistic way. But like moving on to our first Reddit story of the episode, it's actually more about your personal journey, as a remote worker. So this person wants to know, what are the pros and cons of working remotely full time in your opinion? For those of you who work 100% remotely, what do you consider to be the biggest benefit and drawback of this arrangement? So what were
All
yours?
right. So, personally, I'd have to answer this question through the lens of disability, because despite being quite able appearing, I am disabled. And I'm quite newly disabled as well. So, good reminder to you all that you can become disabled at any time. So, you should care about disability rights.
Absolutely,
Just
100%.
a nice little PSA there. I would say that when I became disabled, which I would say probably began about 4 years ago, um, I felt like my career might be over if I did not have accommodations that helped me succeed. Um, I found that, when I had envisioned myself as an artist, a fine artist a painter, it's quite a physical activity, painting, or at least the way I do it, with big canvases and oil paints. And I just realized that that wasn't something that I think that I could sustain long term without it damaging my health further. And so I actually began looking for more of an office job just in the interim to try and figure out how I was going to make that leap into a more sustainable career. And I was working in a role that was a hybrid role, and that was wonderful because it allowed me my rest days and it also allowed me to go into the office and still have that sense of camaraderie and the social aspect of a role.
Yeah.
However, I think there's more that could have been in place in order to help me succeed. I think I did end up leaving that job because there wasn't enough, and also my own illness, continued to progress, and I realized that I needed a situation that was going to be more supportive. And so I started looking for things that were fully remote because I was developing issues with my mobility. I was finding that the commute would actually take a lot of energy out of me. And not only would I get to work feeling awful, I'd then do bad work, I wouldn't say I did bad work, but
So
not to
foolproof.
the high standard I hold myself to, perhaps.
Exactly.
um,
Not your
and
personal standard. Better
Exactly.
than everyone else's,
I'm a bit of
though.
a perfectionist, and I want to be I want to look at my work at the end of the day and be like, this is the best I could have possibly done. And in order to do the best that you can possibly do, you need to be your best self. And the circumstances weren't allowing me to be my best self, and I didn't have the support that I needed in order to make that a reality. So I ended up finding remote work with a social media copywriting agency. So I was a copywriter for high level executives on LinkedIn and X, formerly Twitter, and was writing social media posts and articles for them to sort of grow their presence and their network and their personal brand. Um, and that was lovely because not only was it fully remote, but I also got
Yeah.
to choose my own hours. And that to me, so not only remote working, but flexible remote working, I found quite important because from an accessibility point of view, have you ever heard of the spoon theory?
Yes. Spoonie
Yes.
here.
Yes. Okay. For anyone that doesn't
Yeah.
know, I'll just briefly do a
Yes,
little
please,
run.
of
Yeah.
course.
Okay. So the spoon theory, which I live by now, is the idea that if a spoon is a unit of energy, let's say the average person has 12 spoons, and each spoon is taken away every time you do an activity that drains you of that energy. So maybe your commute, lose one spoon. You take a jog or something, that's another spoon. But then the number of spoons that you start the day with for everyone is different. And I think that the traditional working model is assuming that everyone's got the same number of spoons. And that's just not true. For example, I struggle with chronic fatigue. And so just from the get go, from waking up, I have less spoons than the average person. And so my spoons are more precious to me. I have to be very careful about the ways in which I ration my spoons and budget my spoons. And so also, not only am I waking up with fewer spoons, I find that an activity that might take someone one spoon will take two or three for me. So a commute for me might take two or three.
Yeah.
So it's just a nice little analogy to use when you're trying to understand the daily effects of disability, especially in terms of things like chronic fatigue. And in the post-COVID world, I won't say post-COVID. That's bad of me,
Yeah.
actually. In the world that has stopped caring about COVID, and in the world
Yeah.
where many suffer from long COVID, it's
Yeah.
an
Very important.
especially
Yeah.
poignant analogy because so many people will probably find that helpful We're
Yeah.
seeing more and more chronic fatigue all over the place. And I think people are actually starting to wake up to the idea that, not everyone wakes up with a set number of spoons. So for me, remote working saves me those 3 spoons from the commute. And then I can use them not just for working, but for after work to enjoy my life. Because when I am working with a traditional working model, I use all of my spoons and then some, maybe from the next day, to get through
Yeah.
the workday. And then
Yeah.
not only am I, stretching my capacity paper thin to the point where possibly the quality and the quantity of the work might suffer, but also from a well-being perspective, that employee, me, might go home that day and not have the energy to live a life outside of work, and might have to just go
Yeah.
to sleep and then wake up the next day and do it again, and might spend all weekend catching up on that rest and recharging those spoons.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so it also goes back to, the idea that work is for pay. Work is to, at least in my mind, I hope that it's fulfilling. I want my role to be fulfilling, but ultimately we work so that we can be compensated, and so we can use that compensation to support whatever life we wish to live. And if your work is taking away your ability to live that life, then I feel like you're losing a bit of your compensation. Um, yeah, I think free time is part of work compensation. So um, I would say that remote working has probably hugely influenced my career journey, and it's also enabled me to carve an accessible career journey for me in which I can not only succeed in terms of finding a job that I feel is fulfilling and is, fairly compensating me and enables me to have an outside life, but it also is supporting me. It's ensuring that there's a sense of equity rather than equality. I think that's really important, because the idea that
Absolutely.
we all
Yeah.
have the same number of spoons and the
Yeah.
work method is based on that's equality. But then anyone with a disability is going to suffer from that equality. So we need equity that lifts up people with disabilities and special needs a little bit, just so that at the
Yeah.
end of the day we all reach the same level.
Yeah.
Which
Because
for
like
some people
it's like
just,
just this visualization that came to me was when we were discussing making, because there was a campaign that we were doing. I think it was for UNDP or UN Women, but it was a long time ago that I did, and basically it was trying to push more offices to adopt elevators and to actually build wheelchair ramps, because
yeah,
most offices back in the day at least did not have wheelchair ramps, which is super basic,
yeah,
and no elevators. So if people with who are wheelchair users can't not access the building, they cannot access the building, which is a problem. So the whole thing was equality looks like this: there's a staircase and you expect a person who is a wheelchair user and a person who can walk to use it, whereas equity would be you have an elevator as well as the staircase.
exactly.
Yeah.
I love it.
So that was the goal.
I
But
love
yes,
that.
sorry to interrupt. Just
No,
to
it's fine.
highlight equity, what it
Yeah,
means to.
absolutely.
That's it. Please
It's such
do.
a crucial point. And then the other thing that I would say, um, in response to this Reddit thread would be, um, I think that in terms of remote working as a disabled person, one thing that really helped me find a place in which to grow my career and to, grow my own learning and development and flourish as a whatever I am as a
Yeah.
creative,
Yeah.
would be to know my rights. I think it's really important to know
Absolutely.
your rights, and I didn't know my
Absolutely.
rights until they were potentially pushed a little bit. And so I think once you know your rights and you know what you can ask for, then there's nothing stopping you from asking. And also, you know that not only is it going to benefit you, but it's also going to benefit the employer. And so remote working, if you struggle with, fatigue, chronic pain, any sort of chronic illness or disability, remote working you can ask for as a reasonable adjustment in order to do your job in an equitable way. Even if you're working somewhere where the role perhaps is quoted as full-time, or sorry, in office.
In office.
See, I'm so far from offices, I've forgotten the word for office.
In office?
Yeah.
Never heard of that before. I only know home and bed. That's
But like, as long as, according to the law, as long as your role doesn't require you to be in person, then it's a perfectly acceptable ask if it would help you perform your role better and save some spoons and improve your well-being. So know your rights and ask. Yeah, and
knowing your rights is important.
It absolutely is, yeah. And also, when you're job hunting, going into the job hunt knowing what you won't bend on. Like if you need remote working to function, then just have that as your bottom line. Be like, that's a hard boundary for me. So I think once you establish those needs and really, identify with them, it helps you carve out a career path that will not just sustain you, but help you thrive because it's supporting you rather than taking away from you. So many career paths can take away from people, not just disabled people, but anyone, because it's not supportive of your needs as a human being. And I think remote working is one of those things that is really challenging that.
Absolutely. And I feel like we've spoken about how remote work did evolve over the past years since the global adoption of this model back in 2020. And thank you so much for sharing your personal journey with like that. Is the thing is that a lot of people don't really know what it's like for a person with a disability to have to get up and do work, or like a chronic illness, divergence. And a lot of people don't really know what it's like on a day-to-day basis, especially because it's a very oh look, it's an overall kind of thing. Oh hey, you have this disability, great. It probably only affects like 2% of your life. No, I mean, no. It
I heard a really
affects
good
you in different
analogy
different
recently,
ways.
actually.
Really? Yes.
I heard a really great analogy about chronic fatigue because it's a pet peeve of mine when people compare it to being tired. It's not being tired. It is not.
It's not being tired, yeah.
And I read this analogy that said that people who, I think I read it in a medical journal actually, so, good source. People that
I
experience
love
chronic
medical
fatigue. Oh,
journals.
yeah. I've read too many of them. People that experience chronic fatigue, what they experience is very similar to what an able person would experience if they stayed up for 3 days straight. So that like feeling when if you've ever done like a long haul flight, and you've been up for hours, not even 3 days, just that feeling where you don't even know if you can control
Oh
your
yeah.
eyelids falling and
Yeah.
you feel like you weigh 1,000,000 pounds
Like
and
you shouldn't be operating heavy machinery. You shouldn't be
yeah,
driving. That kind of
exactly.
like
Like things
level.
are kind of foggy
Yeah.
and like it's much more than being tired. It is an extreme form of tiredness that affects you physically, mentally, and emotionally. And yeah, I think it's like you said, it's important for people to actually understand in a holistic way what it is to feel disabled or feel disability impact every little corner of your life like that, rather than for example, like my own disability, I have fibromyalgia and endometriosis, and I'm in the diagnostic process of getting Meniere's disease and multiple sclerosis diagnosed. And so I suffer with a lot of chronic pain and chronic fatigue, brain fog, some memory issues. But for my mobility, I use a cane when I'm outside of my home. If I'm like walking my dog, going to the shops, I will be using my cane. But in my house, if I'm feeling well and I'm just walking from room to room, I don't need it. So the other thing
Yeah.
that I think people don't understand is the idea that disability is also dynamic, very often. And
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think there's this idea that people need disability proved to the onlooker.
Oh yeah.
Uh,
I've seen people yell at wheelchair users
oh, I've been
for
yelled
because
at.
they've seen oh
I've been yelled
what
at.
yeah, just
Oh,
for our listeners, this if you see someone who uses a wheelchair get up for a few seconds because they can't reach something in the aisle, it's probably because they can only do that at that time
exactly.
for maybe a short period of time. It's entirely possible that that's all the energy or the ability they have in that
Exactly.
moment. Because
Exactly.
there
And
are people
also,
who don't need to use it like completely
yeah,
all the
yeah.
time,
Like,
right?
I'm fine walking around my house, but if I went and walked my dog without my stick, I would come home totally exhausted and probably wouldn't have the energy to do anything else. So I use it when and where I need to save that bit of energy and when and where I need to protect my joints a little bit, alleviate any pain. I do use it in the house sometimes. It just depends. And there are plenty of other, aids that I use to
Yeah,
help save those spoons.
yeah,
And yeah, it is an issue. I think feeling like you have to prove your disability.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It
Yeah,
is an issue,
yeah,
100%. I'm in
yeah.
complete agreement with you, but I also feel like, sorry to take this back to remote working, but the reason why we even started this conversation is because people are kind of split over whether or not this actually genuinely helps people who are disabled or people who are from a marginalized group who can't get work that easily, whether
Also,
it
for that,
actually
I would
helps them.
I would say that it's the same conversation as seeing someone
Yeah.
get up from a wheelchair, because I think that ultimately, at least in terms of disability, you need to trust the disabled person and trust that they know their body better than you know it, because you're not in their body. And to form that line of trust with your worker is going to be mutually beneficial.
Absolutely. Yeah.
If it's not hurting you and it's helping them, then I don't see any reason to deny it. So I think it's the same issue, really, is if you are asking for remote work, but someone doesn't believe you need it, then that is an issue of them questioning your experience as a disabled person.
Yeah.
And I think, you can come back at them with all the statistics that I mentioned.
Yeah, absolutely. Please do
Yeah,
just
and
like
say
copy paste the
they're
statistics in
marginalized
the
groups as
caption.
well.
Like,
Yeah, I think you just
yeah.
have to, at some point, you just have to believe the worker when they speak. I think that the idea that marginalized people have to prove the obstacles that they face is really a little bit insulting,
Yeah.
especially when we have these stats to back us up.
Yeah, I mean it's funny because if you do have a disability, right? The disability is not the funny part, folks. Before you jump to conclusion, it's funny that people would demand, "Hey, can you like show me your medical records? I need to see your medical records. Prove it to me." Or like worse, like they'd be like, "Oh, okay, show me so I can see." And that's yeah, just speaking about it makes me feel a little icky.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
it's also the other issue is it can be really really beneficial, but not everyone's had good luck finding it, as this next redditor has highlighted. They've said desperate to find remote work due to disability. I have applied for so many remote jobs, mainly through Indeed, and have not heard back from any of them. I've probably applied for 50-ish just in the last week. My main issue tends to be not only getting called back, but the fact that I see so many remote jobs require a bachelor's degree or experience in data entry, neither of which I have. If I can get help, I'd appreciate it. So, is there any advice that you could give this person? Maybe like from your own experience while looking for it. Could be that Indeed. Personally, I looked at Indeed and I'm like, should
I've
it
never had any
really?
luck with Indeed. LinkedIn is where it's at. LinkedIn is where it's at. But I definitely have some more advice. First of all,
Yes, please do.
I'd say well done on applying for 50 jobs in a week, because ultimately I think it's a numbers game. I really do. I think you've just got to like cast a wide net, as long as the net that you're casting is defined by those boundaries that you won't move on. For example, if remote work is a must, it's a must. Don't sacrifice your well-being. I would also say, when you are looking at the job role as a disabled person, you have no obligation to disclose your disability during the interview cycle. You can, you should, if you need those adjustments, ask for them for interviews. You know, if you're hard of hearing, or if you have a level of blindness, or, you know, issues getting to a place that the interview is held, you should definitely ask for adjustments. But you don't have to disclose any disability if you are worried about any sort of bias or discrimination. But if you don't disclose your disability, I would ensure that in the interview you ask about whether or not they would provide any accommodations that you need. Then, if you get hired, you can ask for those accommodations and then disclose your disability, because once you're hired, if they, you know, act negatively towards you because you've then disclosed your disability, you've got a lawsuit on your hands. So you're protected by, you know, you're protected by, at least in the UK, the Equality Act. You have rights as a disabled person. And then also, if you feel that you aren't being hired because of your disability, and if you have evidence for that, that's also protected in the Equality Act. They cannot not hire you because you're disabled, unless your disability, you know, hugely impacts your ability. Like if you're impaired, for example, if you're paralyzed and you apply for a laboring role, you know, like you don't have a lot of leeway there. But if you're applying for you know, a data entry role and you have mobility issues, but you can either type on the keyboard or use the dictation ability on your computer to do what you need to do, then like, yeah, there's no reason that they should not hire you because you have a disability. And if that is the case, then they are discriminating, and you're protected in that case. I would also say that there are going to be certain sectors that might be more accommodating and kinder. Like, I've had really great luck in the charity sector, so I'd say maybe have a look there. What else? Yeah, I'd say maybe get off Indeed.
Yep, that is number one. Yeah, Indeed
Yeah.
is really really hard. It's
Oh, the
really
other thing I was going to say actually
difficult.
is there are also some great online resources for finding disability friendly employers.
Oh
So
yeah,
you can look at sites there as well, and try and find places that have been vetted in terms of, you know, embracing diversity and inclusion, and making themselves as accessible as possible to disabled people. So there are resources out there specifically for you. Like, the disability community is not a small community, so there are plenty
it's
of
not.
things out there that are built for helping you overcome this problem. You just have to find them, and they are out there if you do a quick Google search. So I would definitely
Yeah.
suggest that, and also just to not give up hope and keep trying. If you know you qualify for it, get benefits from the job center, get universal credit to help support you. Apply for here it's called PIP, the personal independence something. I don't know what the LSP stands for, but you know.
We'll take note of that. Just add it over here. We'll
Yeah,
just add
put
like
that
a
over
box over here. What
there.
does it stand for? Just
Yeah, definitely. You know, if you're struggling to find a job and you're disabled, there are things that you can access that will help you, at least financially, while you're job hunting and looking for something that is going to support you long term. So you have options. Yeah.
yeah. Absolutely, which is kind of like we said, there are so many people who are benefiting from remote working, and there is a great among Gen Zs, which I guess we've kind of grown in we've grown up in this very, very, very restrictive time period, funnily enough, because we say, oh, it's the modern day, yay, but with everything that's going on, it is pretty restrictive, perhaps in ways that we're not familiar with. And Gen Z has exhibited a lot of enthusiasm for remote working, and but contrary to like that opinion, there is another one that is kind of taking center stage right now, which is Britain seems to be convinced that they're never going to do remote work again, that it's coming to an end, that we need them to show up, and you can't be working from home anymore, and so on and so forth. Do you think that because of all this pushback, the remote working might once again get shelved? Do you think this is kind of
Well,
like
I think we are seeing that a little bit already. I saw another statistic earlier from Owl Labs that says that 44% of employers at the moment don't allow remote work, which I would argue is actually possibly illegal if you include remote work as a reasonable adjustment.
yeah,
Um, but I think that because, as you said, younger generations like Gen Z and millennials are embracing remote work, and we are the ones that are soon to be dominating the working world. I think that the trend will continue with those younger generations, hopefully, because I think it is mainly the older ones that are looking back at, more familiar cultural
traditional,
traditions, yeah, that are trying to reestablish those.
yeah,
And I also think that there's just no arguing with a lot of the statistics. Yeah, like you just can't.
you can't,
You can't.
you just
I also think that for good old fashioned capitalists, when you see how much
you
money
save rent.
from I saw another statistic that
Oh,
says that for the
yes.
worker, on average in the US, the average remote worker saves $7,000 a year compared to an office worker because they're saving on transportation,
Oh,
food, childcare, petrol for their car, all these little things that add up. And so while the company is saving, that 2K per remote worker, the remote worker is saving 7K themselves. So that's good for the business, good for the worker, good for the economy. Like, yeah,
absolutely.
what,
Yeah.
how can you argue that?
7K sounds good to me.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think,
Yes.
it is more than a perk almost. It's like, it feels like compensation a little bit. Yeah, it's massive.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
absolutely.
really hope that it does continue the way that it has. And I think that also in the world that we are in, following lockdown and
Yeah.
the huge surge of chronically ill people as a result of the pandemic, I think that we are currently seeing the population gaining a lot more insight in terms of like how we need to support workers and how workers' needs are diverse. And I think that that will also further propel the trend of remote working because I think
Yeah,
that our workforce is going to change. I think that,
absolutely.
yeah, I think that a lot of workers may not have been able to do what they used to do. I mean, we've been through a pandemic, like
Yeah.
majority of the world got seriously ill, and that's going to have an effect on the workforce. And I think
Yeah.
that the
Yeah.
idea that that isn't going to be a long-term effect is a little delusional.
Yeah, that's true. I
Yeah,
mean, there's only so many, like so many home workouts that could have kept a lot of us
yeah, yeah,
healthy at that time. I
yeah.
mean, the ab
Green
crunches
smoothie isn't
every
going to cure
week.
you. Yeah.
There was a new like get abs challenge every week. Every week. Where are my abs? Where are they? I was promised abs. Okay. Um, so as we, like, okay, just as we want to pull, like, reel this back in, is final question that I have for you is, do you see remote working changing the traditional workplace model in the long term? I feel like we kind of have the answer already, but in a feasible way, do you think it could replace, completely overhaul traditional in office working? Do you think that is possible?
I think it is possible. I don't see it overhauling it completely anytime soon, only because of the need for an address. That's kind of one of the only practical reasons I can think of. But then again, we are seeing communication in terms of like mail going digital. It's just packages, really. I'm like, oh, where would they send that?
Yeah.
But I do also think that a lot of people are looking to it's a cost of living crisis. It hits
Yeah.
workers and businesses. And I think that one way that people are saving as well is moving online to save on office rent,
Yeah. Yeah.
and office supplies and, bills for the office. Like that's a
Cloud
huge chunk of
kitchens,
money.
cloud
Yeah,
offices. Why not? Let's all take it to the cloud. Why
exactly.
not?
And I think that also, if we move to a remote space, I don't think that's to say that you're going to completely lose the social aspect of the office, because I think if you moved your work to a remote setting
Yeah.
and you see that, productivity is increased by nearly double,
Yeah.
you're going to have spare time that you could maybe collect and have more team days, more social events that would further increase the well-being of your employees, which would also further increase productivity, and it would go in a lovely positive feedback loop. And I think, yeah, it just all feeds into itself.
Yeah.
And I also think that we're also used to communicating digitally now, that personally, I still feel very much connected to my colleagues when I'm doing remote work. And with Sophie Hayes Foundation, we have offices in the north of England as well. So there are colleagues of mine that I don't see in person when I go into our London office. But who I feel just as close to because of the capabilities of remote working. I mean,
Yeah.
we're best friends, right? And you're in Sri Lanka. So there we
Yeah.
go.
See,
We're the proof. We are the
technology.
proof. Yeah. And also, as someone who, has moved from the US to the UK, I've
Yeah.
used technology to keep in touch with my family. I obviously I miss a good hug, but
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
technology has advanced to the point where we are able to maintain quite a sturdy amount of our social lives without, risking damaging them. And
Absolutely.
yeah, I don't see any reason why it shouldn't continue progressing the way remote working is. And I don't see any
Yeah.
reason why it could take over the traditional working model, at least for, jobs that can be performed online. Um, and I think that honestly, it would be quite an achievement for inclusion and diversity.
It would. It would.
I really hope that the pattern keeps continuing. And I think that the headlines you're seeing about England saying, let's get back to the office, I think that's more wishful thinking than what's actually happening in practice, which makes me feel optimistic for the future.
We need some optimism, quite frankly.
We do, don't
So,
we?
yeah, we really do. But do you have any unconventional advice you could share with our audiences?
I do. I would say, and this is something I'm still working on myself, so I feel a little bit like a hypocrite giving it as
Lead
advice.
through example. You're leading through
Yeah.
example. Not a
Um,
hypocrite, you're leading through
okay,
example.
thank you. Exactly. Exactly. I am trying to remove the word should from my vocabulary. I think that the word should is quite a toxic word, and it always leads me to act within the expectations of others rather than the expectations I should give to myself. And it leads me to compare myself to others when my situation is different and when my needs are different. And the word should just intrinsically relates to a status quo ideal. And so I'm trying to, rather than think of what I should do based on whatever mainstream society has decided is acceptable, what I need to do, what I want to do, and I want those answers to come from places within myself that are authentic and responding directly to my needs and my growth rather than
Yeah.
anything imaginary. So I would say that if you're struggling with comparing yourself to others, if you have low self esteem, if you are disabled and you're using too many spoons because you're trying to use as many spoons as other people, maybe reconsider how much you say I should in your head and replace it with, actually, what do I want or what do I need? Yeah, so I'm still working on it, but I would highly recommend giving it a try because it
Yeah.
does work when you actually do it.
Yeah. I'm personally more of a if I could, I would person.
Yeah, yeah.
If I could, I would, but I can't, so I shan't.
But see, if I could, that's like more related to want and need, isn't it, than should?
Yeah. Yeah. Like,
Yeah,
imagine
should
if
is
someone told
like,
me you should run 4 miles a day.
yeah, like,
Excuse me?
well,
You
you don't
talking to
know me.
me?
Yeah,
4 miles a day? I could be running 8 miles a day. Like, we never think of it in the opposite direction, right? Uh,
exactly. Yeah,
what if I'm doing more than what you just
yeah,
recommended? What do you mean you
yeah,
should? I
yeah.
don't
Set
know.
your own boundaries. Don't let other people tell
Yeah,
you.
I'll do 12 miles a day. No,
Yeah.
I will not. Do not hold me to that. Do
I
not.
wouldn't go. I wouldn't go running unless someone like held a gun to my back. Like,
Oh, let's hope that
bring it
never.
on.
No, you should just not run.
Yeah.
Just don't do it.
Yeah.
This is the kind of unconventional advice we
Do not run. That's
do
what I
not run.
advice. No running.
Yeah. Well, it has been so great talking to you and also hearing your journey and your perspectives and your statistics. It reminds me of that Timothée Chalamet, like his pre-debut, as we call it, his pre-debut video where he was like statistics, statistics, statistics. He has this song. Yeah, if you don't know it, everyone
I
just go
don't think
check
I've
it out.
seen
Go
that, but I'm
search.
gonna look that up after
Oh,
this.
right after this, please. It's genuinely been so great talking to you, and thank you
Oh, you
everyone for
too.
listening in as well. I hope you'll learn something about, you know, inclusivity, remote working, and also knowing your rights, and also not should, not should. Don't do the should.
Set your own
Yeah,
boundaries. Yeah.
set your own boundaries and don't run.
And don't
So
run.
that was, yeah, don't run. Okay, so don't forget to check us out at capital-placement.com. We're also on Instagram, TikTok. We've got lots of infographics on Pinterest. And of course, our podcast is on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. So give us a listen, follow, like, and reach out to us with any of your questions as well. So thanks again. It's been Kalis, and I'll see you all next week.